Well, I'm Eileen Butcher Gardner. I graduated from the high school in 1922, and I went to work in the office in 1923, and the storm was in 1925. And as best I can tell now, and I'm almost sure, that I'm the oldest one living that was on the faculty or the staff at that time, because I just graduated in 22, and actually I was the youngest one on the staff, so I'm sure that all the teachers and janitors and all, and the principal are close to 100 now, I'm sure of that. And I was in the office by myself at the time of the storm. Mr. Todd was principal at that time, and he'd gone to the hospital to get his wife. She'd been in his patient. And I saw this bad storm, and I thought, well, I would go out to another room because I was there by myself. And by the time I got to the door, I couldn't open the door because the suction was, pressure was so strong. And so I stayed there by myself, of course, for seconds or minutes. And then I could not see across the hall because I could tell there was a stairway there, and I could just see forms, but I couldn't tell who they were because the hall was so full of dirt and debris. And I guess it's a good thing that I didn't get out, because our hall were lined with beautiful portraits and pictures that classes had left money, and they used that for pictures, and they just went swinging through the hall, and a lot of the children, pupils, were injured at that time with flying glass. And my sister was a freshman in high school at the time, and I had no idea where she might be, but she came running into the office, and thank goodness she was safe. So I stayed out there in the building until late in the evening, and they turned the cafeteria into a hospital, you might say, and they had children and pupils just lying out on the tables because they'd been injured, and they just turned that into a hospital. And then it was late in the evening by the time my dad came out then to see that I was all right, and we went home. And I remember going along Spruce Street, and you had to watch where you stepped, that you didn't step on a live wire. And then when I got to my home over on North 15th Street, and it was in shambles, just in shambles, and we lost everything that we had. And I stayed with relatives and friends then, and the storm was on 25, March the 18th rather, and then I think that we went back and opened the office March the 31st of that year, and because we had built, see, I went in to work in 22, and that was the first year that the west wing and the east wing had been built, and the old building was in the middle. And the storm came through kind of from the southwest, and it went right through and took the gym and took the old building. And of course the other two buildings were damaged, but not so bad that we couldn't be in them. And that was an awful year for us, and we had to work under hardships, of course. And of course we lost 3 seniors, and many were injured in the storm, of course, in the high school, but we actually lost the 3. And my time up.
Okay.
My name is Mary Wayman Holder. I too am a survivor of the storm. My story is very true, authentic, as well as my memory can serve me. We lived in the southwest part of Murfreesboro. Our home was totally demolished, totally. I had a sister in 7th grade, I was in 4th, and I had a little brother in second grade, and we were all in Longfellow School. Of course, the school was demolished. 12 children were killed in that building, 12 students. My little brother was one of the 12. Fortunately, my father happened to be a doctor and had his office downtown. Fortunately, my mother was spending the afternoon in my father's office because the office girl had taken off the afternoon to go to a funeral. So my mother went down and answered the telephone for my dad. Also, we had a live-in housekeeper who had covered the clothes to be ironed, which she was working on, and left the house and gone to a dental appointment. So there was no living thing in our home except a family pet, our Polly parrot. And fortunately, because our home was flattened, when the tornado struck, we were fortunate, my sister and I, to find each other dirty, muddy, torn, scratched. We found each other, but we couldn't find our little brother. And of course, we began to have much anxiety about that. My dad finally, after an hour or so, walked out from town, climbing over the debris and the hot wires and so forth. He came out with a friend and found us, but could not find his little son. That was the most heartbreaking thing I've ever experienced. I've never seen a grown man sob so much. But anyway, meanwhile, downtown in my dad's office, the injured were pouring into the office for cuts and bruises and all kinds of injuries. There was no water to bathe their wounds or anything. She soon ran out of alcohol and bandages and had nothing, could do nothing for them. But, and also the downtown buildings were not demolished, but many of them were burning. And since there was no water, they had to start dynamiting the adjacent buildings to keep the fire from spreading and burning the whole downtown. So that was an eerie situation. We were among the homeless that you read about. We had no home, no place to spend the night, but fortunately, we had friends in the north side of town that we spent the night. And incidentally, when my father went out to our home, where our home was, he found our parrot. Her cage was flattened, and she was out of the cage, as black as a crow, standing up on some of the rubble, singing, "Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer." And of course, my dad wrapped her some clothing around her and picked her up, and we kept her for many years. But anyway, strange to say, that particular summer, this happened in March, all that summer, and I think any survivor will agree with me, every afternoon about 2:20, we had the most violent, vicious electrical storm that you could ever imagine. And it happened almost every day that summer. My dad would rush home from the office about 2 o'clock. We'd grab our flashlights and a jug of drinking water and hightail it for the basement because we knew we were in for a severe storm. And once you've been through one of those, you never underestimate another storm. We lived in mortal fear that summer. But as the years have gone by, we've forgotten some of the bad things. But it's one thing, no matter how old you get or how far away you move, it's something that you never, 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 never forget. And I guess that's the high point of my day, March 18th, 1925.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I was a senior that year, and I guess I was sort of prepared for this storm because my mother was just frightened of storms, and I think when you're reared that way, why, you are more or less anxious about a storm, and I knew that I was in the second floor of the assembly hall. It seated about 250. I think her name was Louise Atkins from Anna, was our home teacher. And we, as this rumbling continued, the sky began to get greenish black. And we had cloth shades on the south side, and they began to flop. And we had swinging doors on the south end and on the west end and on the east end into this assembly hall. And there was narrow halls that led from that to connect with the new buildings. I was sitting 4 or 5 seats from the east entrance to this hall, several rows over. Well, it got so bad that I became so frightened, I got up out of my seat. I was about the third one to get up out of my seat. And the teacher sounded the gavel and wanted us to sit back down. And wouldn't you know, I forgot a book and a compact on my desk, and I went back for that. Had I not gone back for that, I would have gotten out and not been so crowded. But the last thing I remembered was walking through those swinging doors, and I saw Bernard Sheely, who was killed, and he was the last person I remember seeing, because then it got dark. And then that's the last I remember, because the wall caved in and I was buried, and I think I must have been out for a few seconds or something like that. And my eye was resting on the corner of a brick. And then, of course, I was all covered, and my mouth was pried open. And the sand and gravel and everything, see, it rained very hard, was trickling down into my mouth. And I thought, oh my, I'm going to choke. Then close by, I heard this girl praying. Oh, she was praying. And I can't tell you how many minutes we were buried. This seemed a long time, but they were walking on us, you know, and they're grinding these rocks, bricks. So finally we were rescued, and I never ever recall going to it seems like I remember going to the cafeteria. They told us to or something. And then I thought of home. Well, fortunately, we lived east of town, way out in the country. So I started climbing over the debris, and these hot wires just sparking, and I don't know why there weren't so many people killed like that, and perhaps there were, I don't know. But I had a brother that was 14 years old that day. He was in St. Andrew's School, and he was not injured. And then I had 2 sisters in that school. They were not injured. That school was partially demolished because it was an old building. But see, we were in the old building at the high school, and that is what went. And it did. The side we were on, and that I was sitting, caved to the basement. And we just got out in time. The 3 that were killed were in that room, 3 seniors. However, I had seen Francis Hammer get up from the conference table up front and go into the library, which was through this west door, and something fell and broke her neck. And then Bernard was killed right there, I think, at the scene I saw him. Then Bert Robinson, wasn't it? He was blown from the conference table out onto the sidewalk, and his back was broken. They took him to Chicago, but he passed away. I guess that's all. Principal? She. And
Not you ready? Oh, I'm Irene Gephardt Jerome, and I was also in the same room that Pauline was, but I was fortunate. I was at the front end, and when she told us to sit down, I didn't. I ran through the hall and stood in a corner with my face up against the wall. And when I looked back, I could see this pile of brick and the feet and the hands sticking out. And I got so scared, I ran all the way home to see if my folks were all right. And our house was gone. There wasn't anything left of it. And my mother and dad and the 2 little ones were at home, but they were saved by a bedstead falling over and saved them. And then after that, I went to see, we were very, I was sitting for the Todd children all through school, and I knew them quite well, so I went to see if their house was standing, and it was.
Where did you live? Tell them what your address was.
address, well, we were at the, it was right off of Walnut Street. There wasn't any address out there or number.
Go under the viaduct.
Where the, see the highways through there now, and it's so changed you can't tell. But it was on the south end, I guess, of town, past the end of where it was built in. But anyway, we stayed there until our mother's family came and picked us up and took us down to Cahokia, Illinois, where my mother was raised. And they had a farm there, and they had a house there to accommodate all of us. But I stayed on with the Todds till graduation because we just had a short time to go, and I wanted to graduate. So I stayed there and helped them. And I kept in touch with the Todds then all through the years until they passed away. And my sisters were, some of them were working in the shoe factory, and they were safe, and so were the little ones in St. Andrews, because that was just the roof removed off of that school. And my dad got hurt, and my uncle that was living with us. But not any of us were seriously hurt. But I think everybody in the town were grateful for the Red Cross when they came in so quick, because you couldn't have bought anything if you'd had $1 million, because there wasn't bread even to be purchased. So everybody was helped in their need, you know. And that's about the only thing that was important. But we stayed down there in Cahokia, and we're still up there.
She's still there.
Remember your
they
maiden
remember
name.
your married name.
Pauline Ashman Gardner.
Okay.
At the time of the tornado, my name was Loretta Buck, and now my name is Loretta Blackwood. I was at the Lutheran school at the time of the tornado. We were frightened. We let me see.
What grade were you in?
I was in the fourth grade, and it wasn't long. They released the students. We could go home. I went down about a block from school and stayed with some friends, and my dad picked me up. And the thing that I always remember saying to him, there was so much debris and all around, I kept saying to him, how do you know you are going, this is the right way to go home? How do you know? I figured if I didn't know that he didn't, I don't know why. I was only 9. But I soon arrived home. There wasn't much there, and later it was burned. And we were crossing the Longfellow School. We tried to save furniture and things and move them over there, but they were stolen. Somebody else moved them. And, it's, of course, a big thing in my life, but we all survived, and I'm happy about that. Got something you can say.
Okay, well, my name is Elsa Rathard at the time of the tornado. Now my name is Elsa Knope. And I was doing housework on North 22nd Street. And, well, my sister had been there for a while that morning. I had been out of town the first part of the week, so I was doing my washing this Wednesday when the tornado hit. And I went upstairs and visited with her a while, and then I went downstairs to finish my washing, and then when I heard such a terrible loud flash of thunder, and then I went upstairs and I told the lady I was working for, I said, oh, Mrs. Baldwin, there's a storm coming. I just saw that house go over on the hill, and we was taking care of her son's baby. The mother had died when the baby was born, so the baby was asleep on her bed, and she went and threw herself over the baby, and that's what saved her and the baby. And I went into my bedroom, which was in the door next to her bedroom, and of course they found me between the sidewalk and the highway. And then they took me to the hospital. I had my leg crushed badly, and the next day they amputated it, and then that following Sunday they sent me with, I think, 53 other patients to Barnes Hospital in St. Louis, and I was there for 5.5 weeks. And, well, that's about all.
Okay.
Well, I'm Minnie Rathard, and now my name is Rickenberg, Minnie Rickenberg. and I was going to Campbell Hill. I was in the M&O station. There was a couple they wanted, my dad was a bricklayer, and they wanted to talk to him. So we went to the M&O station, and I didn't even know what was happening, but it got so dark in there. And they told us just stay in there, and it just seemed like everything was flying around our head. But none of us got hurt in there, and we went out, and we met some friends right away that lived out our way, and I walked home with them. And when I got home, why, I told my mother, I said, they had a terrible tornado in Murfreesboro. I said, everything is gone. Well, then we thought about Elsie, and she said she was going to get the neighbor man to walk back to town because my dad wasn't home. So I walked into town. We started out right away walking, and we walked all night, and we found her. Well, we went there where her place was, and then somebody said, well, I believe she's in the hospital. And then we had to walk so far around all them fires. We walked all night, and it was, oh, I bet it was 9 o'clock the next morning when we got home. But when we got to the hospital, we looked at everybody's face, and we found Elsie in the hall. And, well, that was all we could do, so we walked back home. But it took us all night to find her and walk all that distance. But I didn't even know what that was. It was, well, I didn't know what a tornado was. I didn't know what was happening. I guess that's about it.
Okay.
I'm Vivian Parrish. My name was Modslin during the tornado and afterwards. I was engaged to the principal at Lincoln School, and I was teaching at Washington School. I was a second grade teacher. Recess had just been, and the pupils were all seated in the room in the second grade. A terrible light showed at the blackboard, at the top of the blackboard, and we were getting ready to study spelling. All at once, the windows came in. We had no warning at all that a tornado was coming. We didn't have a television, or we didn't have a radio at school then. And the children ran from the room and joined the children from upstairs who came down with their teachers. We all went to the basement. One of the little boys grabbed me around the waist and he says, "Miss Majda, please take me to my mother." He later became an officer in Uncle Sam's Navy. If it had come even 2 or 3 minutes earlier, it would have caught all of our children and a number of the teachers out on the playground. Thank the Lord, we were inside. It took 60 windows out of Washington School. It took the roof, and we operated under a wooden roof, a temporary roof, in 6 weeks' time. Nell McMahon and I had 63 second graders in one room for the rest of the school term. I had only a very insignificant injury, but my black silk hose were in holes. I lost my coat at the cleaners, but thank God I was safe. My folks lived in Florida, and my husband-to-be, Frank Parrish, the principal of Lincoln School, had his brother send a telegram to my folks. And the next morning, after they had received his telegram, it said, the newspaper said, Murfreesboro has been blown away. Thank God they got it before.
Okay.
Joe Meadows, DeSoto, Illinois. I lived over, I think it was Spruce Street we lived on. I was 5, I would have been a 6-year-old in October. And we was uptown, my mother and I, and my brother. And why or how or what reason we got in the old courthouse. And, well, I think, well, not everybody, but a lot of people did too. When it was all over with, we come home. And I remember a power line just snapping, spark, houses burning, and a lot of debris on the streets and everything. But we finally got home, all we had was a subfloor of our house. Looked like the carpenter just quit working, and that we all had a subfloor. And that's about all I do remember. A few days later was I remember the soup kitchens they had here in town. The National Guard runner, Doc Medics and everybody, they was here. But then we moved from after that. Well, we went to my grandparents' house out in the country, and Red Cross had a big tent put up. All our family lived in it. But that's just about all because we left a couple days after that. So that's about all I know about it.
Do you remember the noise? I mean, did you have any
No.
idea it was coming? Or?
I don't even, like I say, we got in the courthouse for what reason or who told us to, I don't know. But there was lots of people that got in the courthouse. But I don't know, I don't remember, well, I don't know who told us to or anything like that. But I know there's a lot of people got in it.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, but I tell you, it shook. It was big old, any of you remember the old courthouse? Big old big stone building. But then we, like I say, we left a couple days after that, went out to the country with my grandparents and lived in a big tent till they got a Sears Roebuck house put it up. Then we moved to Hurst after that, Hurst, Illinois. That's about all, really. I do know one little, it's kind of a little comic, but Dr. Wayman had a parrot, but nobody at the time, they didn't know it was a parrot. And the guys in there digging through rubble and trying to find people that kept hollering, help, help, help. So they all rushed up there and started digging. That parrot walked out. They found the parrot.
He wanted out too.
He wanted out too. But that's about it.
Okay.
I'm Bob Hill. I live at Hurst, Illinois now. I was in the first grade at Lincoln School, and I remember we were out on recess by, it was terrible dark, bad looking cloud, and of course kids, we were running around out there, and they call them in. Pretty soon, I'm sure it hailed a little bit right at the time, and so they called us in. And I can remember mud, great big gobs of mud falling, a big splatter of mud. And there, and we got in and just got seated in school. And first thing I knowed was there's kids and teachers, I don't know, I won't say the teacher did, but the kids anyway started screaming and hollering. And when I noticed why they was trying to get the door open, to get out in the hall. And they couldn't, there's all bunched up around the door and they couldn't get that door open. And I guess it was a good thing that they did, and there was probably a reason. Well, I remember looking out out the window and the stuff flying by the window. And the 5th grade, I think, upstairs was bottom or right above us that fell out. And so they sent us down after we could get out to a little store down there on the corner. A little store down there, and said, well, somebody pick you up there that knows you. Somebody, I remember the roof was off of that place. And the people in there were just crying and carrying on. Well, a kid I don't believe realizes exactly what happened. And I didn't. I remember some great big fellow come and grabbed I and my sister and says, I'll take you home. And he'd, lift us up over the wires. The wires was down and had fallen out of fire just flying from some of them wires. And we lived over back at the park. Well, we used to call it Barge Miller Hill. I don't know whether that's the right name. Go way down the hill, and then there's railroad, a bridge across over the railroad, Missouri Pacific Railroad there, right at the top of the hill. Well, we lived on around the curve there, and there wasn't too 2 sticks to our house left. When we got there, it was gone. House was gone, and my granddaddy, he was watching the storm, see, from the back porch, and directly when he seen that big funnel, why he hollered for my mother and grandmother and little baby sister to get in the cellar. They had dug a cellar where they kept their vegetables and stuff, and they just barely got in that cellar when that happened, hit. And that night, what's outstanding was that night was it looked like from back there it was real dark. And I can remember the streaks of lightning that was going across the skies, and it looked like the whole town of Murfreesboro was on fire. It just lit up the whole town, and they'd used dynamite to, you know, in that, and boy, it was really terrible. And we stayed in that cellar all that night. But this guy that took us home, he asked us where we lived. Well, the best we could tell him, you know, we couldn't hardly tell him, because everything was so different. Gone, houses gone, and everything like that. And over by the high school, I remember the high school. Why, we met our mother, my mother, and he there. And then he took off running over to high school. High school was tore up pretty bad, I think. And he went on over there. But that night was such oh, I can remember that. Oh, that was terrible. How that whole town was burning. And it had dynamite it, and that didn't help a whole lot. I mean, for a kid, you know, back out. But that was something. And that's about it, I guess. I can remember. I remember that our neighbor right across the street was killed in was blowed out in our, well, granddad and dad and them, a truck patched, you know what I mean, garden, had stuff out there, and she was laying out in the garden, her and her little boy killed. Remember that. And that's about it. Everything was, we left the next day and went to Carbondale. And so that's about the best of my memory.
Okay.
My name is Dolly Webb Swable. I lived at 417 Lucier Street. I was in Washington School in domestic science in the basement, and they brought all the children down to the basement, and they had me get over one group of the children that was really hysterical and tore up, because I guess it hadn't struck me yet that it was a storm, and I was not scared, and I'm still not scared of them though. But Washington School had the top blowed off of it. No one was killed there. But whenever I got home, my brother-in-law was there, and his wife. They lived on 19th and Garside Street, and his wife was gone, and they could not find her nowhere. For 10 days and nights, my dad and my brother-in-law went to all the funeral homes in town hunting my sister that could not be found, thinking maybe she would turn up. So this last day they went to a funeral home here in town, and they were to bury the body the next day for a man. But she was 6 weeks pregnant, so they did a autopsy on her and found out her arms and legs were burned off. And they did an autopsy on her, and she was pregnant, and so that's the way. And with her mouth like it was, because she had a funny mouth. Not a funny mouth, but a different mouth. And they found out that it was my sister. So after 10 days, we got to bury her body. And as the storm skipped over into DeSoto, it killed my grandmother. my grandfather had her in his arms, and the tornado sucked her out of his arms and took her in a field in the back of their house, and a 2x4 hit her in the head and killed her. And our house was not hurt, only just one window in the kitchen was broke out. But we had 8 people come into a 4-room house where there was already 5 of us to stay until they could get things done for them to get into some kind of shelter somewhere. So we was really crowded, but we were together, and that's what counted. So that's, and I know that we walked to try to find my sister, and we got as far as the 17th Street, and they made us go back because the fire was so intense that you couldn't go that way. So they made us go back, so we went home. But my dad and my brother-in-law just kept on until they found my sister. So that's what I remember about the tornado, and it's just like it was yesterday.
Okay.
My name is Raymond Swable. I lived in off of our side on 23rd Street, which is now Barchmiller and 23rd. That was where I was living when the storm hit. I was in the Longfellow School. We were out at recess playing around, and I had a big hat on, and they just let us go out for recess. And a puff of wind come up and looked bad. We didn't think anything about it, but they called us in, and we was in line marching in. One of the kids flipped my hat up in the air, and the wind caught it, took it down about a half a block. So I run down and got it, got back in, and just walked in and sat down, and it felt like a steam, cold steam. And you could see the windows give, and that storm hit. And I run back to get underneath the seat so I could protect myself, and there was already 2 or 3 of them in there. And so I started out, and Emmett Fisher was the principal. And he pushed me back, and about that time Ed Pirone came up. And he was a pretty husky boy, and I was kind of husky. So he made a pass at Fisher, tried to get out, and Fisher pushed him back. And then I made a pass, and he pushed me back. By that time, he had Mr. Fisher off of balance. And Ed run out and went down to the landing, and a piece of timber hit him in the hip, knocked him down. And of course, I went out behind him, and that knocked him down. He stayed there, and I went out the second door. And Mr. Fisher said he saw me go out, but he lost track of me, and about that time a belfry tumbled down, and he thought I was under it. So he went out in the yard and checked around, and he found me laying out in the gutter of the street. My head was bleeding, I was bleeding all over. And he said that he looked at me and I was dead, for his car, as far as he's concerned. And he pulled me up on kind of a boulevard and left me, and sometime or some way or another I got up and started down the street, and some girl came along. And she says, come on, says, I'm going home, you can go with me. And I said, all right. And so we went down 22nd Street to what we call Imhoff's, Mr. Imhoff's house. And she told me, said, well, said, here's where you turn at. And I said, yeah. So I went over and went home, and the house was all bent, warped, and slid about 6 foot off the foundation. The roof was gone, all the windows were gone, and Mr. Cummings lived across the street. He saw me, and he said that he saw me stick my head over this glass that was sticking in the window. Said I just laid my head right over that glass like that, and hollered Mom, and just took about 3 steps back and fell in the yard. So he came over and got me and took me over to his house, and they got a mattress and laid me on it in that little old shed. And the shed was ready to fall down 20 years ago, but it stood, and the rest of the stuff was down, but that shed stood. And several of us come in there. My dad came home, and he had a shoulder blade broken. And my mother came home from being at the funeral at the Baptist church. Now that is quite a few women and men were at the Baptist church funeral, and they didn't get hurt in there. And she didn't get hurt, and my brother, he was hurt. So they, next day we went to the doctor, and they took pretty good care of me. And my brother, they looked at him, he had a little scratch on the side of his head there. And they didn't even much as clean around the wound and cut the grass or the hair from around that, and they just daubed him a little bit with some cure foam or something, turned him loose, and he got an infection. And I had some pretty good cuts, but they took good care of me, and I came out of it in flying colors. Well, my dad, they couldn't get him straightened out. The young doctors they brought down here said all he had was a bruise, and his leg, his shoulder kept hurting, so finally he went to get a hold of his old doctor, and he looked at him, checked him over, said, yeah, said, you got a shoulder blade broken. And our car was turned upside down. We had a brand new Ford, turned upside down, and the neighbors come over and turned it out back over, and let it sit there. And we come out later on, and a couple, 3 or 4 days later, and started that thing, and it run perfect. And I saw, as I was walking or going out there later on, some ungodly sights of the streets were all cluttered. People said they could run up and down the streets in cars. Well, in our neighborhood, they couldn't get a car within Missouri Pacific Depot, and that was approximately 4 or 5 blocks from our house. And they had to walk down and get my dad, put him on a stretcher, and take him up the car. And we took it down to my Uncle Phillips on Murphy Street on the east side of town. And there's where we stayed till we got a tent and put it in the yard so we could stay out there and watch it. And I will say the church, St. Peter's Evangelical Church, Reverend Nestor was the minister, and he wanted everybody to stay after church. And they did, and what they done, they gave the people that needed money, they gave it to him with no interest free. You pay it back, but no interest. It was interest free. And the Reverend Nestor told me that they made more money that way, and it would have been charged them interest. And it was quite a thing. But that was the life. And I wound up after we went back to school. Why, I finished up in Lincoln School from March to June, and that's where I graduated. We graduated in there. Then I went into high school.
Okay.
Okay, my name's Louis Russell. I live in Murfreesboro. Have lived all my life. I lived over in the east end of Murfreesboro, which the town, or that section of the town wasn't hit too bad. You know, like windows and chimneys and maybe trees broken. But I was out of school. I'd been sick practically the whole year, so I hadn't hardly started school yet. But I was home that day, and I was out between the two houses, swinging on an old fence. The post was broken, and so Mother came out there and says, "You better come on in." Says there's going to be either a storm or a hard rain. So we went in, and we went into the bedroom, and the wind began to blow and everything. I didn't hear it, you know, it was real loud, but I didn't pay that much attention where it was like a train or, you know, like they say now. And anyway, I had a brother that was born in January, and we had him in the front room in a wagon on a pillow. And we forgot him for a few minutes, and we went back in and got him. And after it was all over with, there was a three-cornered pointed glass laying right where his head would have been if we hadn't picked him up. So that was a miracle that we thought of him then. But we weren't all hurt, and that night we had our house full of people from the west end of town that we knew and could find them and, you know, have them over to our house for the night. But that's about all I know of actually happening outside of what people has told me throughout the years. Okay?
Thank you.
My name is Claudia Cupel. The time of the tornado was Claudia Wisely. I was at Lincoln School. I was in the first grade. My teacher was Sidna Molyneux. I don't remember the storm arriving. I guess I was too young to realize just the extent of it. We were all herded out into the hallway, the central hallway, and many of the children were screaming and carrying on, and I guess I wasn't smart enough to realize the seriousness of what was happening. That particular school was the least damaged. One corner came down. That was the southeast corner. Some bricks fell and there was some damage there, but it wasn't very extensive. After the tornado was over, we were allowed to go home. My sister, who was older than I, and I went home. We had the good sense to avoid the wires. There were electric wires that were down, which could have electrocuted us if we hadn't avoided them. My next memory of the tornado was the evening when the fire was so bad. Our home was not damaged, but we were about 3 blocks south of the southern extension of the fire that began at the M&O railroad yards. My father's business was on Walnut between 16th and 17th, and it was burned. It was a complete loss. My mother was prepared to take us because she thought that it looked at one time that like it was going to get as far as our home. We didn't have suitcases at that point, so she put some of the necessities into pillowcases, and my sister and I were allowed to select our best doll, and we were prepared to leave. But as it turned out, the fire was stopped at the corner of Walnut and 16th, and it did not come down to where we lived. Eventually I got very tired of watching the fire, and of course it had been a long day, and was put to bed, and that was my last memory of the 18th of March. But on the 19th, my family did take me out to see the damage, as many families did, and I can vividly remember looking into the hole where my father's business had been. That's it.
My name is Gladys King, and I was eventually, I was Gladys Baker before that, and I was adopted. I was an orphan child, and I lived with my cousins on 16th Street. And when the tornado came, I was in their home, and they told me to go out and see what I was about 18, I guess, and my foster mother told me to go out and see what the noise was, and I went outside to see what the noise was, and there was roaring, and I said, "Oh, it's a truck down the street," and she said, "No, it isn't a truck." She said, "I've heard noises like that before." And she said, "It isn't a truck." She said, "You'll have to go over next door and get your aunt and tell her to come over to our house. It's a storm, and if we get blown away, we'll all go together." And she said, so we went over and got my aunt, and she came over to our house, who lived next door, and we went in the back door and came in the house, and and about that time the storm hit, and I was my foster mother was in a wheelchair. She couldn't walk, and she had her grandson on her lap, and she got behind the stove, and she had two limbs, two beams crossed over her head, but she wasn't hurt. And I had some lacerations on my arms, and after the storm was over, I was hugging my aunt and saying, well, it's over and I'm glad. But we were all blown, the house was all blown in on us, and she, but I said, you're hurt, and she said, no, I'm not. And she said, you are. And I said, no, I'm not. But after that, my husband, would-be husband, came and got me, and took me down to his house, and we went to his sister's and stayed all night, and that's about all there was.
Okay.
My name is Forrest Potter. I was in the 3rd grade at the time, but I was home with the pink eyes and came very near going back that afternoon. My father was out plowing a garden with a horse, and I was outside close to where he was, and he told me to get in the house, and he started to the house with the team of the horse and tied it to the barn behind the house. We lived up on 149, where you turn to go to the Murfreesboro Cemetery. The storm come in front of the house and went north up the hill towards the cemetery road, halfway, turned, come back into town. In the meantime, my father went to started for the house, and the wind, when he opened the door, knocked him all the way across the room, and he had to fight his way back to close the door again. Then a dish hit me in the mouth. It split my lip inside, and we had to come to town to see about my sister, so I went along with him. Now, she was pinned underneath the roof on the Longfellow School, but before we got a chance to get over there, I saw a man laying on the boulevard on 21st Street between Logan and Elm, who had his thighs cut to the bone, and he was there with his hands clawing at it, and 2 women were dipping water out of tin cans out of the gutter and giving it to him because he was asking for a drink. So after we found my sister, being the town was so tore up, we went on back home. And I had a brother that was pinned with bricks up to his waist in the high school, but he wasn't hurt. But neither one of them was hurt from the school building. Yeah, but one boy who was a friend of mine, Lewis Wayman, was in the same grade, was killed by going back looking for his hat, and things fell on him. I believe that's it.